too. Temperatures on the chilly side, the best of the sunshine holding on across the north and the east. Before then, the rain sweeps its way northwards during the evening and early hours. Perhaps some snow over the Scottish mountains too. Blustery showers following on behind into the early hours. And Wednesday morning, some of these could be heavy. The winds ease for a short time. This allows temperatures to dip away to start Wednesday morning, but it won't be long before those winds whip up again. Bands of rain returning from the north and the west, bringing strong winds again, gusts of 60 miles an hour plus across the southwest of the UK, accompanied by some heavy showers and rain. In between, there will be some drier interludes, some sunnier spots across the north and the east, and temperatures on the cool side for the time of year. Then sunshine and showers for Thursday and Friday, temperatures a little below average.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
from 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. As Joe Biden heads towards Northern Ireland, we ask, is it time that Stormont, the Assembly, restarted? We look at the Labour attack ads. Are they offensive or are they actually becoming really rather effective? And joining me on Talking Pints, Dr. Lee Rotherham, the man who's setting up the Museum of Brexit Charity. But all of that comes after the news from Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you and good evening to you. The top story on GB News tonight. Politicians across Northern Ireland have condemned violent attacks on police in Londonderry. Missiles, including petrol bombs. Sorry about that. Let's begin the news again for you. And the main news tonight is that politicians across Northern Ireland have been condemning the violent attacks on police that have taken place in Londonderry. Missiles, including petrol bombs, were thrown at a PSNI car during an illegal anti-Republican march. The terror threat in the region had been raised following warnings of possible attacks on officers today. Well, the violence comes ahead of the Prime Minister's visit to Belfast tomorrow. He's going to be hosting the President Joe Biden to mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. Well, we turn our attentions now to Israel, where the mother of two British-Israeli sisters who were killed in a West Bank attack has died in hospital. Lucy D was travelling with her two daughters, Maya and Rena, who were 20 and 15 years old, when their car was targeted by a suspected Palestinian gunman. A funeral was held for the sisters on Friday, and their father and Lucy's husband, Rabbi Leo D, says his family of 7 has now been reduced to 4.
But the Israeli flag today sent out a message to humanity, which is, we will never accept terror as legitimate. We will never blame the murder on the victims. There is no such thing as moral equivalence between terrorist and victim. The terrorist is always bad.
NHS England says emergency care will be prioritised during the junior doctors' strike. The 4-day walkout starting tomorrow is being described as the most disruptive industrial action in NHS history. The health body warns the dispute over pay will mean appointments and operations will be cancelled, with immense pressure on staff and services. Labour says it plans to launch more ads attacking the Prime Minister, the next one blaming him for crashing the economy. The Labour leader has defended the first ad targeting Rishi Sunak, which suggests he doesn't want child sex abusers to go to jail. Writing in the Daily Mail, Sir Keir Starmer says he makes zero apologies for the ad. That's despite criticism from MPs, including those from his own party, with Lord David Blunkett calling it gutter politics. 2 climate change protesters have been arrested after jumping a barrier of a dinosaur display in Coventry. The Just Stop Oil activists entered the exhibition at the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum before being tackled by security. The protesters, named by the group as Daniel Knorr and Victoria Linsell, were arrested on suspicion of causing criminal damage. West Midlands Police says it seized 2 large bags of dry paint. And lastly, new details have been unveiled about the King's coronation, including the procession route through central London. King Charles and the Queen Consort will travel to Westminster Abbey in an air-conditioned state coach. They'll ride in less comfortable surroundings in the gold carriage first used in 1831 on their return journey. Crown jewels featuring in the service include the Sovereign's sceptre. Camilla will be holding the Queen Consort's rod, controversially made from ivory. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time to get back to Farage.
It's 25 years since the Belfast Agreement, and Joe Biden is on his way very shortly and will be in Northern Ireland tomorrow. 25 years, and we've had a relative period of peace. I must confess, I was one of those that had grave reservations about releasing 400 convicted murderers back into the community, but things have been better over the course of the last 25 years. And you can walk through Belfast today and it feels like a modern British city. Now, despite that, there are still problems. Recent shootings, and even today in Londonderry, or Derry, depending which side of the fence you sit, there have been petrol bombs thrown at police vehicles. But the real debate now is what happens with the Northern Ireland Assembly, what happens with that building at Stormont, because, of course, the DUP have said they will not go in to a power-sharing government because of the ultimate Brexit deal that has been negotiated by Rishi Sunak. He, in turn, putting pressure on the DUP to get that Assembly going again. And I've no doubt, and we'll listen very carefully to the words that Joe Biden uses tomorrow, but I sense there's going to be big pressure on the DUP to change their position. We'll see. But I wonder, what do you think? Do you think the Assembly should restart, Give me your thoughts, Farage at gbnews.uk. Well, let's go to Stormont right now and be joined by Dougie Beattie, our Northern Ireland reporter. Dougie, good evening. Thanks for coming on. Just tell me, do we actually know what Joe Biden will be doing over the course of the next couple of days?
Very little, it seems. He has one engagement in Northern Ireland tomorrow, and that is in the University of Ulster, before he is then travelling south of the border. It's rumoured that there's different helicopter landing spots for him there, and he's going to spend 3 days in the Republic of Ireland. Now, in and around the Stormont estate, I'm actually standing at Parliament Building, or Castle Buildings. This is where the Good Friday Agreement was negotiated, and just up in, you have to actually drive through the Stormont estate to get here, and you can see the big camera towers and so forth all in place. So he was meant to be here. There was meant to be an all singing and all dancing party for Joe Biden to come here and address the elected representatives that are in Stormont, but of course that didn't go well because of the one thing, the framework document. And this document, of course, is, you can see the size of it is very, very thin. That's Rishi Sunak's document. This document here, this is the same document, but the EU's document. And if you read them both, there is some startling differences upon them. But in one page in it, joint by the both of them, it says that it is there to protect the Good Friday Agreement. Well, it's quite obvious that it actually isn't, because the Good Friday Agreement is no longer operating, because unionists of all shades, it must be said, are not happy with the framework document. It has a couple of really bad points in it, and most unionists today, they seen I was here and my phone was going, and they were saying, Dougie, the reason that Rishi Sunak tells us that we must find that bravery that was back in 1998 was that we were all in the room behind. Everybody was in a different room, but then negotiators went between them. It took quite a long while, I know, I was standing here, before they all had an agreement, and we were all out the car park in the back when they came out and announced that agreement. Basically, everybody in Northern Ireland was in those negotiations. What has happened here is that Rishi Sunak, and before that Liz Truss, and before that Boris Johnson, went and negotiated with the EU on behalf of the unionists. They were never allowed in the room. They never got to ask the questions. And what has happened is we now have a deal where the EU has final say over laws on trade, customs, VAT, everything else that is coming in and out of Northern Ireland. There is actually only one green lane in Northern Ireland, and that is for retail. If you read these documents very closely, it means that only retail can get in and out, and that is if it's one from point to point delivery. So that's groupage, real problems with groupage, which means that product going out of Northern Ireland back to the UK won't have the same lorries. It'll be like me getting a taxi to Dublin Airport. I'd have to pay it both ways because it's never coming back empty. These are all things that are going to stall the trade of Northern Ireland, and particularly in amongst them is things like state aid, where they have to obey EU rules. Their VAT will be at a disadvantage with that of the EU, and particularly corporation tax as well. So all these things, unionists are saying, hold on, we are at a very big disadvantage here, and we are being held inside the EU. We have no control over those laws because we have no MEPs. And if they've no MEPs, well, how are they going to change the laws? And it is now being rumoured that the Republic of Ireland are going to be given 2 more MEPs. And of course, Sinn Féin and the Nationalists that sit in this assembly have MEPs in the Republic of Ireland. So they could change the laws as they want. So as opposed to a power-sharing executive, unionists are very much saying this is an administrative executive of which we have no control over the powers. And that is a big, big problem. Tonight, what we're seeing in Londonderry is the end of 94 parades. 2 of them were very contentious. They are Republican parades. They're celebrating the Easter Rising. One of them didn't take place today. And the second one, to be quite honest about it, the pictures look very impressive, but it turns out that there's a lot of youngsters hit a PSNI patrol wagon that was monitoring the situation. You will see a camera on top of it. And it is really coming to an end now. We'll see what the night brings, but at the moment, all is pretty quiet in Derry.
Dougie, great analysis. thank you very much indeed. Well, joining me now from Belfast is Baroness Kate Hoey, of course, previously chair of the Northern Ireland Home Affairs Select Committee when she was a Member of Parliament for Vauxhall for many years. Kate, first things first, Biden is coming. Would it be right and fair to acknowledge that the Americans did play a very important role in that agreement 25 years ago?
Good evening. Yes, I think it's fair to say that George Mitchell did get involved very much and played a very useful role behind the scenes. But of course, what Biden seems to want to say, and other Americans, is that America is a guarantor of the Belfast Agreement, and that is not the case. It was a joint agreement, and the only guarantors are the British government and the Irish government. So Biden, I'm not quite sure why he's even coming, to be honest. We're having about 3 days of disruption of traffic and all sorts of things. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of security that's going to be here for him to sort of sweep in for half a day, one engagement, not going to Stormont, and presumably will make some great speech about how Stormont must be taken back. So I don't think that's going to impress anyone really in Northern Ireland, because Biden has made his views on Northern Ireland pretty clear, and he's not quite, I don't think we could put him down as a supporter of Northern Ireland. He's very, very much a supporter coming from his background of Irish republicanism and Irish nationalism.
Yeah, well, I think some of us would say he's not a great supporter of any part of the United Kingdom, but that's perhaps another matter. Yeah. Now, Kate, we've just had Dougie Beattie, our reporter, pointing out that what is said in the glossy Windsor Framework document from the British government and what is in the European Union document are often very contradictory indeed. Whatever gets said by Biden and is being said by Sunak and others, I just cannot see the DUP going back and getting Stormont resurrected. Can you?
I can't. And I think that if they did at this stage, there would be a big revolt amongst the grassroots of unionism across Northern Ireland. And let's not forget that when we had the 20th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, Sinn Féin, Stormont wasn't sitting either. Sinn Féin were out for 3 years. So the DUP have only been out for just over a year. But, Dougie's analysis was absolutely correct. Why would anyone go back in to Stormont and have to implement, basically, separating out themselves, i.e. their country, Northern Ireland, from the United Kingdom, which is their country. And so you can see why the DUP will not want to go in. So I can't see it happening, Nigel. There will be huge pressure. And I'm afraid that a lot of politicians in Westminster have not really read those two documents that Dougie held up. Absolutely different views. And the framework document has actually made the protocol, in my view, worse, because it can't actually be changed and there's no way out. And we can't have that. And therefore, the only thing that politicians from the pro-union side have got left is to stop Stormont happening. And I'm afraid that is likely to go on for some time.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the stalemate is there for a very, very long time to come. Kate Hoey, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. Yeah, no prospects of change there, and Sunak the spinner may have got away with it in Westminster, may have got away with it with his own party. It is not going to wash with the unionist community in Northern Ireland. Absolutely no chance. In a moment, we look at Labour's recent attack ads. Are they in poor taste? Are they gutter politics, as Lord David Blunkett calls them? Or are they really rather effective? And are Labour now showing, actually, they really do have the stomach for the fight?
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel. Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today. Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, campaign adverts and campaign posters often stir great controversy. I do know something about this myself from times gone past. But boy, oh boy, we've all been saying that Keir Starmer's Labour Party is really lacklustre. There's no big, clear message. They don't appear to perhaps have the stomach for the fight. Well, maybe over the course of the last few days, something has changed. Have a look at these adverts that Labour have been putting out. And I think you'll see that, frankly, you couldn't get stronger messages. You know, do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. Do you think an adult convict convicted of possessing a gun with intent to harm should go to prison? Sunak doesn't. Do you think thieves should be punished? Sunak doesn't. Boy, oh boy, they really are going for it here. Now, it's led to an absolutely massive storm of publicity and, 20, 30 million views on social media of these ads and on the commentary around them. And within the Labour Party, I mentioned before the break, Lord Blunkett, he thinks the whole thing is gutter politics. Lee Anderson, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, saying they're vile, but they're getting noticed and they're getting talked about. And interestingly, Starmer is not backing down one little inch. In fact, if anything, he's doubling down, and they're promising there are more ads to come. Well, is this effective? Will it work? Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List, supportive of the Labour Party as an organisation, but not actually of it. Are you surprised by these adverts?
Yeah, I'm a bit surprised. Keir Starmer's pitch to the public has always been perhaps a bit different to what we've seen the last week. It was, I'm a man of character, which I think he is, but then also I have the competence that someone like Boris Johnson and Liz Truss certainly lacked. There's a completely legitimate argument to be made about 25% budget cuts to the Ministry of Justice over nine years of Tory government, and the effect that's had on so many areas of the criminal justice system. Give you one very quick stat: the effective conviction rate for rape offences reported is between 1% and 2%. So we would all agree that that is horrific. I think personally I would have gone down a slightly different path with the adverts, but to still land that critique about the justice system being decimated.
Yeah, I mean, the Tories, of course, have attacked the Labour Party. You know, the grooming gang problems have happened in Labour-led towns. Labour are soft, Labour are weak. So there's a case, a little bit of sow and you shall reap. But this is like American attack ad politics. This is the kind of thing that you get in the States. You know, there's a Senate race going on, and it seems to be more about rubbishing the opponent, very often in America, than it does about promoting your own agenda. There's a really American feel to this. What you're really saying is you see this as being out of character for Starmer.
I don't know him well enough, but it's certainly a change in approach, and I question a little bit whether it's the right one. Even I've got complete faith in Keir Starmer. My concern is, and I'm a Labour member and have been for a couple of decades, and one of the things we talk about is perhaps how we try and do things a bit differently, Conservatives, who are ruthless and often nasty at general elections. You talk about Corbyn being described as a man who hated Britain. Not true. Ed Miliband stabbed his brother in the back, and he'll stab Britain back by Sir Michael Fallon. Deeply unpleasant, deeply personal, and it backfired. And the Boris Johnson smears about Keir Starmer and Jimmy Savile, which I'm not going to repeat because they're just nonsense. So the Tory playbook has been a pretty nasty one. I think Labour have gone for something more personal. As you said, 20 million views on Twitter, people are talking about it. But, you know, as the old adage goes, I think you've got to play the ball, not the man.
Unless politics has fundamentally changed, unless our politics has become as Americanised as our fast food culture and many of the films that we watch, I don't know. I mean, the general election may be some way away, but if the Labour Party begin with this sort of messaging and say there's more to come, maybe we're in for the most unpleasant general election ever.
Well, I hope not, Nigel, but when you talk about American politics, we've all got to accept our role in that, and I have to hold you to account over the Brexit referendum, the poster of the Syrian refugees on the Slovenian border, and the suggestion they're all coming to the EU and then to Britain. I found that deeply inappropriate, and I think that's contributed.
How many people were crossing the English Channel in 2016 in dinghies?
Well, it was a much lower rate than it is now. We've seen
No, zero. How many came last year? 45,000. I believe I'm wholly justified in putting that poster out. I said, as Europe weakens its borders and people come, they will try and come to Britain. The link is absolutely direct.
Well, no, I think that's nonsense, because first of all, your poster was as a land border, and we're talking about waterborne crossings, so that doesn't stand up.
Hold on,
let me answer your question,
You enter the EU illegally, and you then come to Britain illegally. But look, I said at the beginning of this, I'm used to using posters that cause great debate. And I found, actually, that what you do if you use... Now, they've got to be accurate, and that's important.
But your poster wasn't. That's why I need to hold you to account for it.
It could be 80,000 this year. I probably should have been stronger. But the point is, if you put out posters like that, and I found by doing that, you lead the debate. You lead the debate. And I think that's what Starmer's doing here. I think, actually, this is the cleverest thing he's done since he was Labour leader.
I disagree. I wouldn't have taken this approach with a poster, but I still have complete faith in Keir Starmer, and I suspect actually a lot of the Labour campaign is going to be on the very traditional areas of GP waiting lists, NHS waiting times, school class sizes, and so on and so on. But Nigel, I have to come back on what you say. You're always very professional and cordial to me, but I do think the 2016 poster was based around a distortion that tens of thousands of Syrian refugees would come to Britain, and that did not happen. I think you did know what you were doing.
Every single one of the people trying to get to Britain by dinghy has crossed the land borders of Europe or the sea borders of Europe. Many have come in through the Mediterranean, some have come in through the eastern land borders, and I said, if Europe's borders are weak, we will finish up getting a huge flow. What I hadn't reckoned is that Brexit Britain, a government in Brexit Britain, would allow this to would allow this situation to occur.
Well, I would say you've been unvindicated by that point. But anyway, let's bring it back to where we are today. General elections, we've generally seen the Tories first to get their hands dirty, and Labour, under Ed Miliband and Jeremy Corbyn, the most recent elections, there's been a nervousness and a desire to kind of hold the line that perhaps we're a bit more principled folk and we don't quite go up to the brink in the way the Tories have. And the one that really sticks in my mind is one I mentioned earlier about, quote-unquote, Ed Miliband stabbed his brother in the back and he stabbed Britain in the back. And that is absolute codswallop because Ed Miliband won the leadership in a fair and open election. And I think the Conservatives, Jack Straw...
Hey, but now the gloves are off.
Jack Straw said the Tories are squealing like animals. I can't remember which animal he described, but he was saying the Tories, having done this type of thing for 20 years, are screaming and squealing horribly. That is absolutely true. I would gently encourage Labour to go back to its traditional style of campaigning, and of course with all the tools of the internet. But Labour has got to campaign in a different way to the Tories as a values-based party.
I don't think they're going to, even if you do want them to. I think this is now set to run. I think we're headed for a really, really vicious run-up to the next general election. I'm not saying it's good, I'm just saying I think this has set the tone. In a moment, what on earth is going on in Scotland when the leader of the Scottish Tories says people should tactically vote for the Labour Party? Well, the Tory party don't like it. I actually think he might be right. Scotland with John Curtis in just a moment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Well, some of your thoughts on whether that assembly in Stormont should get restarted and whether it will get restarted. One viewer says the answer is only when the unionist contingent agree to it, of course, as it is set down in the settlement. I'd prefer it if the Unionists stood their ground. But I tell you what, the Unionists are going to stand their ground. Now, the leader of the Scottish Tories, Douglas Ross, said the other day, talking about the next general election in Scotland and saying, look, you know, we are the Conservative and Unionist party. The most important thing to us is that we keep Scotland very much part of the Union, get that second referendum off the agenda. He says, where there is the strongest candidate to beat the SNP, you should get behind that candidate. And he urged Rishi Sunak, as well as Keir Starmer, to look a bit beyond their own narrow party agenda. But you see, the thing is, given our first-past-the-post system, given the absolute tribalism that that instills, I think these parties care more about themselves, ultimately, than even the causes they purport to be in favour of. That's my take on it. Does it make sense? Are people voting tactically in Scotland already? And let's have a little look at what the first-past-the-post system does in Scotland. Well, I'm very pleased to say that Sir John Curtis joins me down the line, President of the British Polling Council and Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University. John, good evening. Welcome to the show. I was having a look before we came on air at nearly all the constituencies, parliamentary constituencies, Westminster, in the Glasgow city area, and similarly at the ones in the Edinburgh area. And you can see in nearly all of these seats, last time round, the Labour Party, the SNP won all these seats, but nearly all of them, last time round, the Labour Party in Glasgow were getting about 4 times the number of votes than the Conservatives were getting. So actually, if the SNP are weakened by all the current scandals and whatever else is to come, logically, what Douglas Ross says makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, it makes sense if you think that the principal objective in voting in Scotland is to try and diminish the SNP as much as possible. But there are 2 downsides so far as the Conservatives are concerned. Downside number 1 is that in helping Labour to win seats in Scotland, they might also be helping Sir Keir Starmer secure an overall majority in the House of Commons. And indeed, the fact that SNP support has gone down and Labour now look as though they've got a reasonable chance picking up maybe at least a dozen seats in Scotland, maybe more, has undoubtedly improved Labour's chances of getting overall majority across the UK as a whole. That's problem number 1. The other problem is that he who lives by the sword can die by the sword. And one of the concerns that the Conservative Party south of the border will undoubtedly have is whether or not voters are so disenchanted with the Conservative Party that they are going to vote tactically against the Conservatives in the UK general election. There were already signs of that happening in the English local elections in May of last year. It'd be one of the things we'll be looking out for in the local elections this year. But if Liberal Democrat voters in constituencies where Labour have the better chance, some of them switch towards Labour, and equally some Labour supporters switch towards Liberal Democrats, where the Liberal Democrats are better challengers, then the Conservatives could lose out quite badly, much as they did, by the way, the last time they crashed to a serious defeat, which of course was the 1997 general election. So you can don't be surprised to hear that south of the border, talk of tactical voting is heard with a certain amount of trepidation inside Conservative Central Office.
Yeah. No, that's a very good explanation. And when it comes to tactical voting, you know, none of our parties advocate tactical voting. No. It's sort of almost a community secret that gets discussed in bars and shopping centres. I mean, how big already is tactical voting?
Well, at the last UK election in Scotland, it was only evident at the margin. So in the constituencies where the Conservatives were the stronger challenger, the Conservative vote didn't go down quite so much, and the Labour vote went down a little bit more than elsewhere. And meanwhile, where Labour were the challengers, the opposite was the case. But you're talking about 1% of the vote. So to that extent, at least in 2019, it wasn't that important. Now, that said, however, in 2021, with a somewhat different electoral system whereby voters had 2 votes and they could therefore split their votes if they wished to do so, there was some pretty clear evidence that Labour voters living in constituencies where the Conservatives were the better challenger, some of them did vote for the Conservatives on the constituency vote and then went back to Labour on the list vote, whereas the opposite was true in constituencies where Labour were the challengers. Some Conservatives undoubtedly moved towards Labour. And that's one of the reasons why the SNP did not get an overall majority in the Holyrood Parliament back in 2021. And that may be an indication that there's now a rather greater readiness in Scotland to vote tactically than was the case. But the truth is, it won't have an awful lot to do directly with what the parties do. Now, of course, what is true, and one of the reasons why tactical voting can occur is, well, shall we say, I don't think the Labour Party are going to try that hard in Murray or in Gordon or in some of the other constituencies in the north of Scotland where the Conservatives might have a chance. And equally, yes, the Conservatives are not going to try that hard in Glasgow. And that sometimes sends out a message to voters in exactly the same way as we saw in recent by-elections south of the border. Now, in some constituencies like Wakefield, Labour tried hard, the Democrats only put up a paper candidate, whereas in Tiverton, for example, Labour didn't try hard, and the Democrats were doing all the fighting. So you can get those subliminal messages from the parties, the way in which they intensify or otherwise their campaign, which voters will pick up. But sure, now, what Douglas Ross said specifically is something that it's very, very rare for parties to be willing to do.
Well, John, as you know, I'm an opponent of this, where the SNP get 45% of the vote and 90% of the seats. I'm not a fan of first past the post. Maybe tactical voting will be what decides the next election. Thank you, Sir John Curtis, for joining us here again on GB News. A couple of quick what the Farage is for today. The first one is that there's been an increase by 38% in civil servants taking days off for mental health. It's put down to excessive workload. It's particularly aimed at the Department of Justice, which we talked about earlier on in the programme. Forgive me, with so many civil servants working from home, how on earth can mental health and stress be up by 38%? And the what the Farage that's really made me laugh today is Elon Musk, the ever-radical Elon Musk. Well, the BBC have now, on their strapline on Twitter, because of Elon Musk, they're now described as government-funded media. So they're put into the same class as Russia Today and TRT from Turkey and many others. I find it really, really funny, maybe slightly unfair, maybe a little inaccurate. After all, it's a licence fee that we pay. But I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying much of what Elon Musk is doing over at Twitter. Now, in a moment, I'll be joined by Dr. Lee Rotherham for Talking Pints, a campaigner against government waste, a campaigner against the excesses and ultimately membership of the European Union. And he's setting up a museum of Brexit. We're going to find out more in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Talking Pints. Dr. Lee Rotherham, welcome to the programme. Very good to see you. Now, you are a long-term, very consistent campaigner. You've been campaigning for many of the same issues over years and years with organisations like the Taxpayers Alliance. I sort of got to thinking, we've got the highest tax burden that we've had since Clement Attlee. How well do you think government's spending our money?
Well, let's compare now and back 20, 25 years ago when the bumper bucks came out. I think there's more of an awareness that government isn't there to throw money at problems. I'm not convinced that it's widely appreciated that it needs to do better. Because I think it's a lesson that has to be keep being relearned as people progress through Whitehall, people progress through the various institutions. And as you know full well from time over in Brussels, it's always spending somebody else's money over there, so that lesson is persistently never learned.
Well, it seemed over there that money was no object for anything. But I'm thinking really about the NHS. Extraordinary, isn't it? You know, we were having debates about whether we should increase to 7 or 8% of GDP, our spending on the National Health Service. This row raged for many years. We're now spending 12% of our GDP on the NHS, 50% more than we were just a few years ago. It doesn't feel 50% better.
Well, certainly not if you're queuing for something. There are certain issues in politics which at times are on a pedestal, and it's politically dangerous to talk about them because it's seen as a dangerous subject, and as soon as you start touching on them, then you're seen as an enemy of the status quo and of rationality and an evil person almost, because you're trying to change something which has been put on so high a pedestal. The NHS, unfortunately, is one of them. For years, immigration has been another one, where if you wanted to discuss the issue, you were basically on the fringes of politics. And,
well, that's
and
where
but
that's
there's a
where
real
I
danger.
was.
I know, and there's a real danger with that. There's a real danger with that because if you don't then turn a subject into a politically debatable and discussable subject, then what you're doing is you're creating a space for the absolutely extreme far left, uber far right characters to pop up and say, look, we're the people who represent you. And that's a deadly scenario. We saw it much more in continental Europe over the years with the Front National and others that we have in the UK, because it never quite got that stage. But with the NHS, the fact that we are, it's almost a taboo subject in politics. It's a dangerous situation to be in a democracy.
Well, of course, our electoral system has made it very difficult for other parties, other than two in England, to get anywhere. So it's been very, 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 very difficult, and that's why other parties across Europe get a foothold. Although I suspect Marine Le Pen is going to be the next president of France anyway.
I have no insight on that. I've got good contacts with the UPR, which is a small Gaullist and very sound policy. We have obviously different views on things like the role of the US and relationship with Washington because they are Gaullists. But I mean, good luck to them.
Now, you were a Eurosceptic, long-term Eurosceptic. There was always a Eurosceptic wing of the Tory party, sort of Maastricht onwards. It was relatively small.
In Parliament?
In Parliament, relatively small. In the end, the Conservative Party, against their judgment, offered a referendum. They didn't want to do it.
Almost by accident.
Well, how much would they have lost to UKIP if they hadn't?
Yes, and the lesson, of course, of the European elections historically.
Yeah. I mean, you know, he had to fly the white flag on this. But Lee, you know, some of the most ardent Brexiteers are feeling a sense of frustration. You know, I've been talking and meeting some of Britain's inshore fishermen. You know, the little under 10-metre boats, you know, down to 7 metres, some of them. Yeah. People going out and they're catching mackerel on you know, hook mackerel for markets and restaurants. Seeing more bureaucracy placed on them in many ways, and this goes for other sectors too, than when we were members of the European Union. There's a real frustration here.
Well, it's not surprising because if you think about it, I mean, so one of the first things I did in politics, I started out working for Sir Richard Boddy, who was a Euro rebel who'd resigned the whip in practice, in principle, over the treatment of his Boston fishermen. So one of the first things I did was to go out to sea with the Boston trawlermen and see for myself. And the decline of that once great port was quite tragic, and we're not seeing that regeneration and renewal. We got things, to be honest, things have got to such a stage after so many years of the Common Fisheries policy that it was never going to regenerate overnight. What is a disappointment is in the withdrawal treaty, of course, is that we didn't get control of our waters back to certainly not nowhere near the extent which we got. There is an incremental thing, but ultimately it was a cropper, or it fell a cropper to the late stage renegotiations when the deadline was approaching, and clearly it was bartered away, probably for transit rights and haulage rights.
For this,
but it doesn't help. It's got to be renegotiated again in another 3 years. As well. There's an ongoing hostage situation there with the French and the electricity connections.
I mean, we'd never have won Brexit without people turning out to say we've got to get back control of our borders. We'd never have got anywhere near winning it. And again, on that, there's really big disappointment. I mean, what I want to ask you, really, as someone that's been involved in and around the Conservative Party for many, many years, is this a Conservative Party?
Yes. Don't forget, political parties are always broad churches. Some are much more cathedral-like than others. Others are much more like chapels. And fitting everybody in, it takes a bit of effort, but at least you've got a clear, concise, condensed set of principles and beliefs and objectives. So within that great hall of the cathedral, yes, there is conservatism somewhere, and of course those who
That's
are...
not very... I mean,
well, what I'm saying is...
So we have to look and hunt to find Conservatives.
What I'm saying is you might have to go to the cloisters rather than to the altar. Of course, the Conservative Party since Margaret Thatcher has been a disappointment from those heyday days for Thatcherites. Because that was a high watermark of free market principles and sovereignty and the belief in the state and on the individual and personal responsibility, and all these things. Now, I think we are a lot closer to those days than we have been in many past incarnations of prime ministers. So I'm not entirely despondent. I would like to go much further. Right. And there is, of course, a manifesto battle yet to be fought.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I think the globalists are in charge personally, but we'll see. Now, you've done a bit of sponsorship and advertising for the reserves, what we used to call Territorial Army. Been an important thing to you.
Very much so. Thoroughly recommend that people join it. It's hugely rewarding in terms of personal development. The level of camaraderie is incredible, and it's massively character building. and you're serving your country.
Yeah.
Even if you don't deploy overseas, I mean, I've done operational tours, but even if you don't deploy overseas, you're supporting the nation's defence.
No, a good ad. A good ad.
Join today.
For a very good cause. And finally, the Museum of Brexit.
Yes.
I don't know anything about it. What the hell is it?
Right. Well, OK, so a few of us a couple of years ago were spotted that we were starting to bin various things which we had for donkey's years, because the type of the Eurosceptic campaigning was no longer going on. It was kind of like remaining threads. So rather than bin stuff, we decided, well, it'd be much better to preserve it. And the best way to preserve it is through a set of archives, museum, and an actual display, a physical and library, a physical place where people can learn about what's happened. Not just about recent years, 2016, but going back into the deep stuff, the complicated stuff about what is sovereignty, what is free trade, where does that come from, what makes the country different from its continental counterparts, and is there a sense of Europeanism?
If your museum pretends it was the Conservative Party that got Brexit, then you're making a big mistake.
I can promise you, there's in terms of the planning, there's a whole section there on UKIP. And I'm going to nobble you for bits for the Nigel Farage case on that. But this is a critical point.
Yeah.
It will be fair and balanced, because although...
And where's it going to be?
We've been looking in particular at Peterborough and also Boston as part of the epicentre where Brexit happened. We're still open-minded. It depends on sites which are available at the time when we get the funding. But the key point is it'll be fair and balanced, and we're doing an appeal right now for people to rootle around and send in stuff, because we've got 50 drop-off points around the country, county drop-off points, which are not going to be open for that much longer. Okay. But it's an opportunity for people to easily hand things over.
If people think they've got things of value and things that are interesting, how do they get there?
Right. So if you look at the website, museumofbrexit.org, or you look at the Twitter account, you can see details there about where your local drop-off points are and the easiest way to drop them off.
Museumofbrexit.org.
Yeah.
Got that, Lee? Pleasure to have you.
Awesomeness. I'm not being keeping up with you. I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry about that. Thank you. Now, I've got one or two, Farage. The Farage is here. One is, does the UK really need a steel industry? Yes, it does, because steel is very, very strategic and important, and we've allowed the Chinese to come in and totally dominate that market, and that doesn't make any sense at all. Worryingly, they might be using quite a bit of steel in Taiwan before too long. Alex asks, Fury, Joshua or Usyk? No one's going to beat Fury. No one is going to beat Fury. That, I know Usyk is an amazing little boxer. I think Joshua is well past his best. I can't see anybody doing it against Fury. Laura asks, do you think this government will ever take us out of the ECHR? What, this Tory government? You must be joking. Not unless they're put under the most enormous external, journalistic, and then ultimately internal pressure. Now, we want to try something different with Baroness the Farage. I read these out. I never know what they're going to be. You know that already. But let's do some videos. So you make a video, you send it to me, you send it to farage@gbnews.uk, you give me your question, make sure I've got your name, make sure I've got your location, and make sure the question is no longer than 30 seconds. You want to ask me a question on video? You can do it. farage@gbnews.uk. They'll be filtered out by people that work for GB News. I will never see your question until we see your mugshot and we play it live on the telly. And tomorrow is the first day for it. Send your video questions, farage@gbnews.uk. Patrick Christie's is standing in for Jacob.
What
Good
a
evening.
fantastic idea that is, by the way. The videos.
I think so, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
It really works.
No, I think it will work. And as I say, as long as it's kept concise and it's a clear question. So
no, it's really good. We are the People's Channel after all, so bring him in.
Exactly.
So just very quickly, what I've got coming your way. Well, apparently we're a horrible little racist country, and we are not racially just, and we never will be. Well, I'm doing a bit of a deep dive into how other countries fare compared to us. I'm also having a look at the doctors' strike. How much of a bad deal do junior doctors get in this country compared to other countries? And, of course, we'll be looking at Northern Ireland as well. And there's Labour attack ads on Sunak.
Yeah, I know that. And they're rather effective, aren't they? That's
they
point.
are.
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah. I did a few myself in the old days.
No, I remember.
OK, we're done. Let's get the all-important weather. The April showers.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. We have wind warnings in force for western parts of the UK through Tuesday and on Wednesday as an area of low pressure brings some wet and windy weather to our shores. We can see that nicely on the bigger picture. This area of low pressure bringing those strong winds, outbreaks of heavy rain. It could lead to some local disruption. We could see gusts of 50 to 60, possibly 70 miles an hour around some western coasts over the coming days. A fairly quiet evening after a live